Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Cherry Live. I'm Alita. If you're not familiar with Cherry Lives, these are an opportunity for us to have sessions with thought leaders and different innovators and pharmaceutical companies, tech companies, you name it, within the healthcare industry on topics that matter to healthcare professionals. Today, we're joined by two physicians who are also founders within this healthcare ecosystem in Alberta, but have a product that is spanning Canada. Today, we're going to get into their story, why they chose to embark on this adventure, and how they found that that's impacted both their careers, how they're trying to impact the healthcare ecosystem, and everything in between. I'm going to actually just pass the mic over to have you introduce yourself. And Matt, let's start with you.
Awesome. Well, I'm Matt. I'm one of the co-founders of Ava. Mike and I started it. What would that be? 2017. Actually, it's been quite a long time. So I'm currently functioning as the CEO and kind of also helping to lead up more of the product dev technical side of Ava.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. Mike.
Yeah, I'm Mike Forseth. I'm a family doctor in Calgary, and I'm the other kind of original co-founder of Ava EMR. I'm based out of Calgary. I'm actually in my clinic today. Looks like Matt's in clinical space as well. So
I was going to say both.
Parachuted out of our clinic real quick to be here. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. And Jordan, if anyone at Cherry Health isn't familiar with you, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm a family physician and one of the co-founders here at Cherry, currently acting as Chief Medical Officer. I do a lot of our marketing, but otherwise I get to just hang out and kind of talk to these guys today. It's not about us.
Awesome. So I want to start the conversation with what got you into medicine and a little about your original journey that got you to just before you started Ava and how things were going, where you felt things were going well, what might have been some of those prompts that made you decide to go down this path of Ava. But Mike, why don't we start with you? What got you into medicine and how was it going?
Yeah, so I grew up in Calgary, so it's kind of fun to come back and work here. But I had a very long journey to get back here. So I actually graduated with a business degree from the West Coast, from Simon Fraser University. But I had this is kind of a focus in finance, in the math around financial securities and stuff. And I just wasn't that interested in it by the time I graduated. I loved the math, but I didn't really love the work. So I'd always wanted to get into medicine. I got into med school in Australia, and that took me on a 10-year journey over there. It was a great place to work. I'd highly recommend it to anyone. And then when I came back in about 2015 or 2016, Matt and I worked at the same clinic, and that's, I guess, where the story of Ava started. But I work in family practice and really love it. I love the kind of connections with patients and following through kind of a longer term journey with their health and social welfare. And so I still practice a lot as a result, despite juggling this other full-time job at Ava. So
that's impressive.
Yeah.
That's impressive. And Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Yeah. So pretty much I happened to get into medicine almost kind of by accident. So I grew up on a farm. And,
There we are.
Yeah, exactly. Grew up on a farm in southern Alberta, and then liked science. So did a science degree, and then thought that research would be kind of fun, and then realized that research is actually a really challenging lifestyle because you're always fighting for grants. And so I was like, well, what else can I do with a science degree? And I was like, I guess medicine. So I applied to that and luckily got in. And then actually really hated medical school. I think mostly because I had no idea what I was getting into. I literally didn't know that you had to do residency after medical school until about halfway into the first year. And people were talking about residency, and I was like, yeah, what's that? I have no idea. So anyway, got through medical school and ended up in residency. And I remembered thinking to myself, like, oh, I don't think that I can do this medicine thing long term, but I need to pay off my student loans somehow. So during residency, I started trying to learn computer programming, because just happened to have a conversation with someone at one point that said, we were chatting about startups and how that's sort of a fun area. That was, I guess, 2013-ish. But then luckily in residency, just had two excellent preceptors that kind of really got me interested again in the clinical work and how satisfying that can actually be. And so by the time I finished residency, I actually kind of really was looking forward to and enjoyed doing clinical work. And so, yeah, Mike and I met up in 2015. Ava kind of started out as just I wanted to keep teaching myself programming. And so once I got through a bunch of the kind of tutorials and things, one of the challenging, probably the most challenging pieces of programming is kind of knowing that there's 3 or 4 ways of doing things, but figuring out the way that makes the most sense for and actually having to commit to that decision and make that decision yourself. And so started just programming kind of what would I think my perfect EMR would look like, because that was what I knew and what I dealt with day to day. And then shortly after that, Mike and I looked at opening our own clinic, and we figured, well, why not? It couldn't be that hard to run our own EMR. So we ran our own EMR. And the naivety was a real big help for us.
I love both of these eclectic experiences towards medicine. I think, so many physicians know from such an early age that this is their path. This is what they want to do. Maybe they had a relative, a friend, you name it, or were heavily influenced. So they know early on, they're pretty familiar with what they're getting into. But for both of you to kind of have found your path through alternative means is really neat. So tell me a little bit about, you mentioned, Matt, you created something that you thought would be your dream EMR. So what did, as you decided, hey, what would this look like? What kind of things would it have? Why did you feel that there was this need? And what did that look like to create that dream EMR?
Yeah, I think, well, through residency, I think we counted up at one point, and I think I tried 6 or 7 EMRs, something like that. And the interesting thing is they all, some of them did some things really well, but generally none of them really did everything well in a way that I found sort of fit the normal workflow that we dealt with clinically. And so it was sort of more or less just a way of sort of practicing developing like a full-fledged application in the very beginning. But I sort of tried to think back to, well, I liked how this EMR did this, so I'm going to borrow that. And I liked how this EMR did this, I'm going to borrow that. And, none of the EMRs did this very well, but I think what would make the most sense is if we did it this way. And so, for probably close to about 1.5 years before we even launched it live in Britannia, Mike and I's clinic. We kind of just, even before we had thought about starting a clinic ourselves, we kind of just, I kind of worked on it after working on weekends, just as something to kind of do and teach myself some new stuff.
You weren't busy enough being a doctor, it's like,
not at all.
Let's add one more thing. Let's get creative and build an EMR.
Exactly.
And that initial V1, was that entirely yourself, or did you have help actually with the development of it?
No, just me. So I had actually, it's funny. One of our CFO, Rob, we have very different ways that our lives have unfolded. And so he was talking about how, his perspective on life is you look at a goal and then you decide a bunch of plans on how to get there in the end. And weirdly, I feel like my life, and I think maybe Mike, I'll let him speak to that more, but my life has been the exact opposite of that, where it's kind of just a lot of serendipity and lucky situations. So I weirdly, my 2 programming mentors in the beginning, randomly I met, there was a colleague of ours who is riding his bicycle home from Stampede in I think 2016. And he just happened to ride by a porch of these 2 guys that were having a beer on their porch. So he just had never met them before, but waved at them and said, "Hey guys, happy Stampede." And they said, hey, come on up for a beer. So then they all hung out on their porch. And then long story short, like a month later, he invited them to a work party. So then Mike and I, well, we both met them at a work party a month later. And it just so happened that they kind of worked in the same programming language that I worked in. So then we just started chatting and then going out for like every couple of weeks, we'd go out to Whiskey Wednesdays and they'd help to mentor me when I ran into different problems here and there. So none of it was really
great
planned. It just kind of happened.
What a Calgary story. I mean, Jordan, you should just, and then Mike, I'm going to get to you about a little bit of this too, but Jordan, you should comment about how you and Max met as well, and how Cherry Health kind of came into fruition. I think it's quite funny how the similarities here.
Yeah. But Max and I met at a party one night, and then a week later we'd started working on Cherry. Yeah, that's kind of how it went as well. Same story.
Amazing.
People know people, and I was like, "Oh, what are you interested in?" Me, oh, this, and all of a sudden, before you know it, the creativity and the ideas are flying, and before you know it, a couple of years down the road, you're a tech founder. Who'd have thunk it? But yeah, and Mike, how about for you? Like, how has this being, what would you actually, I'm going to rephrase that. What would you think other doctors should know, or other healthcare professionals, if they're thinking about getting into entrepreneurship? I mean, owning your own clinic, that's entrepreneurship on its own, but founding a tech company or this type of journey, what do you think others should know?
There's an element of the unknown scramble that I think a lot of physicians don't come out of med school or residency with an appreciation for, because we're trained to follow protocols, follow evidence, follow guidelines, follow process. And entrepreneurship is a lot more creative, and you're always pivoting, you're always changing your plan. You're always failing. Like, I think both the reason the EMR is great and the reason it almost failed is we tested in a clinic, we ran in a clinic, and Matt was endlessly willing to iterate when things didn't work. But that consumed a huge amount of effort and resources, and there was no guideline on how to do any of this, right? And actually, Matt mentioned this before, but we had to be a little bit naive going into this. Otherwise, you kind of never do it. Because if you looked at all the regulatory and privacy issues going into this space, it's massive. And we got there because we didn't have long-term goals. We just had grit, I think, and just like fought through things that we encountered. So.
I love that creativity, grit, perseverance, kind of getting into it and just being curious. Matt, how about you? What do you think? I mean, I love this sort of, we decided, heck, why not? And also not luckily, but through your own hard work and building your clinic, you had a space to test it out, which I think is also excellent, right? Having that petri dish that you can try it on for size at and learn and iterate in a pretty safe space. But what do you think people should know about as if they're thinking about taking on their own adventure like this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think really good question. There is a lot of parallels, I think, between medicine and entrepreneurship, but like Mike said, there's also very different kind of philosophies as well. And so I think I kind of am more familiar, I guess, more on the tech side of it than the human client-facing businessy side of it. But I think on the tech side of it, the nice thing is when you're kind of working on a problem or debugging your problem, it's very similar to when you're like debugging a human and their medical issues. The only difference is that when you're doing it in a computer, you can iterate so fast that you can try like 3 or 4 versions of something and see what worked until you finally kind of get it, benchmark it, and get it working the right way. Whereas with humans and medications, a lot of times it takes weeks to see whether or not something is going to be the right direction. So but sort of a lot of similar things, and I kind of agree with Mike. Like I think family doctors especially are very, I don't know, I think very well suited just being generalists. A lot of generalist medicine really fits with the early stages of being in a startup, you really kind of need to be okay with being, and actually be more than okay, but be very interested in knowing a wide breadth of things, but maybe not being super in depth and specialized on everything. And I think Mike and I's personalities really helped out with the early stages of the startup, because we were able to get kind of like an MVP out the door, test it and iterate it in our own clinic. And we might not have known, especially from a technical side, the most in-depth, efficient way of doing one piece or another, but we were able to get it up and running enough so that we could actually get to the next stage where we could hire specialists that were ultra specialized in this scope. And I think that's one of the, I think one of the challenges, but one of the really fun things about being in a startup. I love, like, I can't stop learning about new technologies and new processes and kind of philosophies of how to run stuff. And that's what really kind of keeps me excited and interested about entrepreneurship long term, I think, anyway.
Well, and when was that first hire? How far through were you guys before you like started assembling the team?
Oh man, I don't even know, Mike. It was probably 2020-ish, give or take.
Couple of years.
I think who is the first?
Well,
It was a while.
We kind of worked with one or two people early who kind of came and went, and I think it was probably because it was too early to have other people on board. We kind of we hadn't really grown into a company yet. And then I think our first hire was 2021. I'm trying to remember. It was Ainsley who joined us.
It's COVID. No one knows what dates anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's all a bit of a blur.
Yeah.
It was just, generally it was a very hard decision to make. Like, when are you big enough to when is this idea good enough to maybe turn it into a business? We had an MVP at Britannia and we thought it was pretty good, but you're pretty biased, right? You think you're the greatest at this and your system is better. And we definitely learned a few lessons when we first kind of had a few customers, and we had to, poor Matt had to scramble a lot, and luckily he has endless energy as long as you give him enough coffee. So the starting point is weird. It's like, when do you hire? When do you grow? When do you fund? When do you do all these things?
And did you have initial sales there? Or how did you raise funds? How did you pay the first hire? Did you guys pay yourselves for the first couple of years even? How did that all go?
No, we don't pay ourselves. We were bootstrapped, essentially. We were working full-time in clinic and kind of using a little bit of our own money on the side to pay for little contracts or other things we needed some of the infrastructure that Matt had to build it on. We were bootstrapped for a long time. And then as we got customers and we had a little bit of revenue, we just continued to use that revenue to then build the company. We still don't really take any money out of the company personally. Now that's
awesome. That organic growth. Well, and so you guys are making like a big splash, especially here in Alberta. Like, I continuously hear about it when I'm at events, when I'm talking to people, networking. Like, my clinic that I work at uses it. I love it, by the way, full disclosure. It's fantastic. Like, what's been the secret to that success? Like, why do you guys think it's taken off so much?
It's a good question. I think it's a mixture of, I'd love to take all the credit because, I think it's a decent product, but if I'm being honest, I think that actually we got pretty lucky as far as timing in the market and just kind of what the market actually looked like. So I think a couple of things. There's a huge appetite for different EMR solutions rather than kind of what the current status quo is. And I think also timing wise, like, it was, I remember not even that long ago, the idea of a cloud-based EMR was kind of, all the privacy and regulations around that had people pretty concerned, because a lot of cloud computing was quite new, and we weren't as familiar with it. And so the fact that cloud computing started to come in, there was this market that was kind of stagnant for quite a long time, and quite a big appetite for change. And I think too, it just depends on, we've been very lucky to also be able to connect with and get some business mentors kind of around, I guess that would have been 2021, I think. And they were super kind of serial entrepreneurs that helped us understand a little bit more about the business side of things. And they were very focused on company culture. And in the beginning, I remember Mike and I thought, like, well, it's literally like 4 of us. So, I don't know if we need to invest as much on, exactly, it's fine. But as our team grew, and we're up to like 30 employees now,
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been exciting, scary, but that upfront work for culture, I think, really made a difference. And I'd like to think, I don't know for sure, but I'd like to think that I think our internal company culture kind of spills out to our customers that use us. And I think that's a big part of why we get a lot of kind of word of mouth referrals and things.
I think that's such a great question for so many who are considering going into entrepreneurship and becoming founders themselves. It's great to have an idea, and it's great to find a co-founder. I think, research shows that those who have co-founders, those tech startups that have co-founders, tend to do better than those who are solo entrepreneurs, because this is a slog. Doing it all by yourself is incredibly difficult, and having that co-founder or two to knock ideas around with and have complementary skill sets is really, really important. And so that's great. So, that founder team. But you mentioned finding mentors and that group around you who might be able to help and influence and bring guidance where you were a bit lacking from your previous experience. Mike, tell us a little bit about what that impact has been and how you went about getting some mentors and how important that's been for you guys.
Yeah, that's a great question, because it was a really good learning experience for us, I think, is trying to find people to work with. I think there's definitely been, this flood in the market over the last 5 to 8 years of new companies that are doing SaaS products or have some new idea. And there's lots of VCs out there and companies that will support you, and a lot of them are great. But finding the right one is, I think, really important. And I think Matt held me back a little bit on this, because as soon as a few of them approached us, I was pretty excited to just like, hey, that sounds great, right? And if someone offers you a bit of money to work with you and some support, and you're already stretched to the limit, so you really need that. But I think we waited, and I think we found the right group that made a strategic investment in terms of equity. They worked for the company. They didn't actually offer any financing. They brought their expertise in, which was really what we needed to fill a big blind spot for us, which is we understood our product, but not how to really grow a tech company and build teams and build culture and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I just suggest to anyone, you got to take your time. You don't jump into the first partner that walks through the door, right? And that's not how you get married either. It's like you got to date for a while and ask all the right questions, and if you do it right, it pays off. So.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, from finding co-founders to finding investors to finding those early employees who have that same level of grit and compassion and kind of desire to make a change or be a part of something as yourselves do. So that's really interesting. Matt, anything you want to add about, how you thought about finding those mentors or that group to put around you to move this forward? Because I think this is so important, because I think this is where so many early stage founders struggle, is how to get to that next step.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And that's it. Like, it's, you hit the nail on the head. It's really easy. I guess not easy, but it's maybe the easiest initial part is having the idea of what you want to do. And then the next piece is building it. And if it gets built, then the next piece is actually being able to sell and scale it. And they all require different levels of expertise and domain knowledge. And I think for us, the biggest thing was, I think probably I think probably the most important initial thing is to really get a good sense and be honest with yourself about what your goal for the company is in the end. And if, because the partners that you choose and the strategies that you take will be very different depending on what your end goal is. And so just as an example, if your goal is to, which is kind of the classic startup way, is to build a company and then eventually in 5 to 6 years, try to flip it and sell it to a larger company, which is, I think, a super reasonable approach. Your strategy will probably be a lot different. And yeah, that upfront financing is going to be very important. And you're going to want to have mentors or VCs that are saying, okay, here's a chunk of cash. We want you to know, have a really good sense of how you're going to spend it to reach XYZ growth goals. And probably you're going to be looking for another round of financing in, a couple of years potentially. And hopefully then your evaluation will be higher, and you're going to kind of work your way up the ladder until you flip it and sell it finally to kind of as your end goal. But if your goal is more to grow a company, that the goal is for it to be a standalone company for the long term, and your exit plan is to either hold it privately long term or to reach for something huge like an IPO down the road, your strategy will probably be a lot different, and that initial financing may or may not be the right choice. For us, it wasn't, but you also want to make sure that you have partners that understand that that's kind of your end goal, because a lot of VC firms function in these kind of 3 to 8 year rounds, usually around 5-year funding rounds. And so if you're reaching, year 3.5 and their group of investors are expecting them to kind of exit that round in year 5, they're going to put a lot of different pressures on you than if you had chosen a company or even a private equity group that's more interested in long-term growth. So I think that's why initially Mike and I were really focused on bootstrapping. Is we're kind of scared about VCs, and we knew that if we got into a room with them, they knew more than we did. And so there'd be a lot of terms and stuff that they'd throw in that we had no idea about, and we didn't have the right people to bounce that around with. And then I think the other thing is we were really keen on finding partners and mentors that really saw kind of the long-term vision and the long-term value that we were looking at, rather than the vision of basically just seeing this as a quick way to make a 5 to 10x return on whatever their investment was. So that worked out well.
I love what you just described. Was quite savvy. So it sounds like you've done a lot of learning and research and mentorship along these last few years. And I think, helping founders understand some of those how to get this knowledge is really, really important. And so, Jordan and myself, we're pretty integrated in the Alberta tech ecosystem. So, I'm sure we have folks who are watching this from all different parts of the country and potentially beyond. A few ideas that I have, and then I want to flip this back onto all three of you, is how you as founders have gone about getting informed in this larger, how to build and scale a tech company type knowledge. Here in Alberta, for example, in most of our cities, in Edmonton and Calgary and Red Deer, etc., there are tech support groups like Platform Calgary, like others, where you can actually go and learn from some folks who have done it before, because I always think that's important. Reach out to people who have done what you are trying to do versus someone else who's figuring it out from scratch, because while that's great, they may not have the answers. So learn from someone who's done it before, through your ecosystem partners, through those incubators, because there are incubators in every city across Canada as well, and the US. So finding those incubators and who the mentors are and what free programs they run that you can access and tap into, and following them for tons of information that they put out on LinkedIn or on their websites, etc., as well as some podcasts and things like that around starting tech businesses. But for yourselves, having done it from scratch, I think, and the reason that I bring this up too is sometimes people end up, and we've seen it multiple times, giving away a ton of their company or giving away a whole bunch of cash for consultants early on, where they feel that there's a gap. And we've seen that really hurt early stage companies and really hurt their ability to truly succeed. So in your experiences, and I'm going to actually, Jordan, I'm going to start with you on this one. How have you gotten the business acumen? How have you and Max gone from, you're a physician, you've got an idea, you start to build, to truly understand all this other stuff that comes with building and scaling a tech company?
It's been a lot of trial and error, to be honest. Like, just kind of going out and doing it has been the biggest thing, right? Like, inaction, of course, yields nothing, right? If you have decision paralysis on something, you're just gonna fail forward, I guess, is the idea there, right? And so just trying out different things. We've kind of had we've done a lot of mentoring programs and a lot of different things, and it's come with mixed results. There's been a lot of times where there's just completely conflicting advice. It's really good for brainstorming and kind of laying out all the cards on the table. But at the end of the day, it comes down to just trying something. And one of I guess the lessons that's been learned there is, as you're kind of sending out feelers and trying different things out, try and limit the collateral damage, you start out with a smaller scale test and see how that goes, as opposed to putting all your eggs into one basket and following a certain avenue down. So try and do things in sort of a smaller scale. But at the end of the day, when you're building something completely new, I mean, there really isn't a roadmap for how to do it. There's no playbook on exactly what to do. Nobody has done exactly that before. So it's kind of hard to even say yes, absolutely rely on advice and coaching and mentorship as if it were the gospel, because it hasn't been done. So just getting out there and trying it. Don't be afraid to fail, right? You're always learning things. You're always pushing things forward, even if, the answer is a no, or something doesn't work, or something's a complete flop, right? No is the second best answer.
I love that, Jordan. I
Yeah.
think this is really important for physicians to know as well, is that there will be conflicting advice and there will be conflicting journeys and both equally well. And so, it's nice to hear those different options, but then that you are going to have to make that decision for yourself and give it a shot. And I like that idea of kind of doing buffered trials so that you're not, throwing everything at the problem. But Matt, how about yourself? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I would say a couple of thoughts. So my thought is agreed. We did the Platform Calgary Junction program, which I think has a new name now, which was super, super useful just for getting connected, because we really hadn't been super connected. And it was also during COVID. So all of the in-person events had been kind of kiboshed, which was challenging, because I think probably the best thing as an early founder to try to identify kind of the right people for your network is to actually just look up whatever your local startup ecosystem is and try to join as many of the events. Even if it's just going and listening to someone else present, you'll rub shoulders with people that have been in the ecosystem or have tried the startup life before a few times. And oftentimes, it's pretty, people love talking about themselves, myself included. And so if you find someone who's been in the startup ecosystem before, they would probably love to chat about their benefits and downsides and to give advice on specific questions. Then I think the other two ideas are, there's two big pieces, especially in medical startups, and basically there's the domain expertise of the medical bit that we're working on, and generally as a founder you're probably, or you should be, the most knowledgeable person in the room about that kind of domain that you're working on, and that's going to be your huge competitive advantage. But I think there's also this whole domain of how to actually scale and grow a startup from zero revenue to being able to actually hire a team and then scale the team and scale the sales and stuff. And that's something that you actually, as a founder, are definitely not going to be the most knowledgeable person in the room about, and you probably shouldn't be, because you should really be focusing on, I'm a big product guy, and so I think you should be focusing on the product in the beginning. And so Mike and I were laughing because we, when we went through our platform experience with Platform Calgary, we were assigned a mentor, and they were excellent, like super knowledgeable. And on this side of the business experience and how to scale stuff, way more knowledgeable than us. So we were trying to soak up kind of all of the advice and knowledge that we could get there. But it was interesting because as soon as they kind of forayed and gave us advice around the product and the domain experience piece, we'd kind of take that into account and think about it, because we really like highly respected the opinions that we were getting. But more often than not, we'd say, okay, we kind of get now after thinking about this where they were coming from. But you know what, because we know the domain a lot better, we think that would actually be, a negative move for us. So we'd end up. And so I think that's the other piece is don't, try to be as aware as we can be about the limitations of our knowledge, but also the areas that we have strength, and then really kind of commit to that. And then the final piece is I recently was just doing like a little informal tech chat with a couple of other startups, and one of the CTOs was talking about how they've started to classify decisions, and it works for business too. I think even better for business, but they've tried to classify decisions and things that can easily be rolled back and things that are hard or impossible to roll back. And they were comparing it to database architecture, which is a good point. But I think in a business world, it's very similar. And there's some things like, taking meetings or even some incubators, or just going to events and stuff is a really low risk, easy to roll back sort of thing that you're doing. But as soon as you do start to look at term sheets and start to sign stuff with people and start to get into these more deeper legal agreements, those are the things that are super hard to roll back. And so the amount of checking and running things by other mentors or even paying for consultant advice, I feel like those are the areas where it probably is worth it, where you have a specific question for a specific thing that you're dealing with. But for the other stuff that's low risk and easy to roll back, the worst that you're wasting is your time, which is super valuable. But at the same point, you're probably going to learn something from it anyway. So it's still worth it. So
I love that.
Those are kind of my main thoughts.
Love that. And I'm just going to go back on get yourself out there, go to the events and look for those serendipitous, meetings. I mean, that's how you found each other. That's how Jordan and Max found each other and all these kinds of things. So I love that. I wrote down the classify your decisions. That's a great one. But also sometimes getting out of your comfort zones. I think a lot of folks, those events feel maybe a little bit intimidating, maybe a little ick, maybe a little, but get out there and see where you can meet someone who might be that next person who's going to help you go from here to here, and that kind of thing. And Mike, how about yourself? What are you thinking in this space?
Yeah, well, I think Jordan and Matt have really nailed it. But I think the learning for me was, again, I think in medicine, you're taught that there's usually one or two right answers to a problem. And you often don't, like on rounds, you don't speak up unless you're absolutely sure that you know the answer, right? But this is a very different space. Networking is super important. So getting out there, talking to people, telling them about your idea and being happy to be wrong or take feedback on what they think. And it doesn't mean you're wrong. And that's the weird thing is, people will tell you you're wrong and you might be right. And you got to go with your gut and do what you think is best for the company. And other times you really have to take people's advice. And it's hard to tease that apart. But I think the more we met and networked and met people in different spaces and in our space, the more we understood exactly what our product was and how to grow it. I try to have this philosophy now where anyone who reaches out to me that I don't know who wants to have a quick meeting, I'll meet with people and see. It doesn't mean you're committing to some sort of future business initiative. And I think other people have that attitude as well. Whereas, in the medical space, you're used to being like, well, I shouldn't write a specialist a letter unless I have a very specific question, right? Like you don't want to waste anyone's time. But I think part of this is it's not time wasting. It's education for everyone. So.
I love that. So we're getting close to time. The last thing I want to know is what's the next big thing for you and for Ava. And Matt, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm the more on the product side, so I've got lots of ideas. I think the biggest thing, and it's shaping everything now, is obviously AI. So we similar thing about just luck with timing. I feel like we've been super duper lucky to be in a spot where we've built an EMR that's kind of designed the way it is as a platform. And so the obvious next step, we were lucky that we had enough revenue coming in that we were able to kind of very quickly hire the right people. And so we're leaning very heavily into, we've got about 4 major initiatives on the way. So we're the 2 biggest things that I think are really pushing forward a lot of the AI stuff. And we've got a few things out in beta, which has been really exciting. And we've got our team working on some features that like honestly feel like magic as we use them. They're still, in very early development, but so I think that's a really big piece. And then the other piece for us is really regional expansion. So we've been I feel like have a very strong foothold in Alberta. And so at this point, we're really kind of starting to see that growth in BC. And the next big step is we've got a team working on Ontario integration. And now, as of like 3 days ago, Canada Health Infoways has reached out, or maybe a week ago, and we're we now have to find a way to resource a team to work on Prescribe It. So there's lots of different things that are kind of moving forward. But if I'm being 100% honest, the stuff that gets me the most excited is really the AI stuff, because I think we're seeing that stuff that we thought wouldn't be possible until the 2030s is now looking very, very possible by kind of 2025, 2026. So we have this mantra internally of being the first touch-free EMR in Canada, and I think we have a very good chance of actually getting there. We're just kind of working on lots of little experiments to make sure that we can make that happen.
That's super exciting. Thanks, Matt. Mike, what do you think? What's the next big thing? And it can be about you as well in this journey as an entrepreneur and as a founder too, but what's next?
Well, Matt, I think Matt's summarized it quite nicely, but I think, the vision overall for us was creating this platform where health data actually gets exchanged more quickly. And I think getting into the EMR space was one way we could be part of that conversation. When we started years ago, it was like sitting at our desk trying to get a fax from one clinic to our clinic about a patient and pulling things off Netcare. And you spend a lot of time just being a data collection clerk and then trying to create your own version of that data output. And I think AI solves part of that, and also being a platform solves part of that. So I think we now have close to 60,000 patients on the patient portal, and a lot of them are very active users connecting with their physicians weekly, and being able to exchange all sorts of data. And that kind of platform too, where we can connect different clinics together in the cloud, not just have EMR data siloed at one location, is what I'm super excited about in the long term. Like, I think, we'll get back with medicine to a place where all the data is there and the data output is fluid, and you can just interact with the patient and contribute the important touch points. So it's been cool to see suddenly how AI is going to facilitate a lot of that, but we have the platform to do it, and that's pretty fun. So
I love that.
Awesome.
I'm going to give the last word to Jordan, but I do want to thank you both for coming and congratulate you on what a interesting journey, both as physicians, but also as founders it's been, and the successes that you're seeing, and I'm sure will continue to happen. And I think a theme that came up, and I'm going to steal this a little bit from Jordan from a talk he gave recently, but the theme is that you are the experts in this space. You know the pain points, you know the challenges that physicians and patients also are facing, and other practitioners are facing on a day-to-day basis. And so kudos to you. And I always encourage others, especially after Jordan's talk the other day, encourage others who are also experts to get involved. And that can be starting a company. I mean, that's an epic level of involvement for sure. But sometimes it can also be providing that mentorship to companies who maybe have a little bit less of that technical expertise as a physician or as a healthcare professional. Or it can be, joining just different thought leadership groups and bringing those challenges and their expertise to the table. But yeah, thank you for getting involved and putting your time and energy into trying to solve challenges that you see and that we all see are really, really huge in the industry, and that will have huge impacts on physicians and the way that we provide care, and also on patients across Canada. So that's awesome. Jordan, any final words you want to add?
So somebody sees this who's never heard of AVA, who should be paying attention? Who's going to reap the most benefit, and what do those look like? Why should they go check it out and book a demo?
So I think the best feedback we get from customers is just how fluid it is. So, we came from an EMR space where data entry was really cool, and because you could run queries against it, but we really lost control of the workflow with a lot of, I think, legacy products. And that's what we paid the most attention to starting out. Super fluid, minimal clicks, minimal screens. I think almost everyone we move from legacy platforms, at least who is a family doctor, feels they've had a net gain and things have really improved for them in terms of workflow, and especially their ability to connect with patients seamlessly in that single platform. And Matt is always taking kind of leadership on tweaking that. How can we get rid of a click? How can we streamline this need for, during the pandemic, it was like instant faxing, import the address book for every pharmacy in the province. Like, let's make this really easy to provide care during the pandemic. And that's just our core strength, I think, in all areas, is really trying to address those little pain points.
I love that. And I'll give one last how to contact moment out there. Of course, if someone wants to go directly to the AVA site, they can do that. They can also come onto the Cherry Health website to learn a little bit more about AVA and learn some information there, and book a demo directly through the platform there too. So lots of different ways to interact and engage. Any final words from anyone before we sign off for today's Cherry Live?
I'm all out of everything.
Thanks so much for having us. It's super fun. I always love talking about what we're building because we're proud of it, and we're also just, we live and breathe it pretty much. So, and I'd also just echo, I highly encourage just getting involved for any physician, like you were mentioning, Alita, because it's so no one understands the problems in the system better than I think physicians do. And so the more involved we can be, whether that's generating our own startups and businesses, or even just being involved in focus groups and feedback groups, I think it's really important to be involved to improve the system. So.
Love that. Great final words.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
We'll chat again. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot.